I'm Lucy Chen. I've been a linguist in tech for 2 years, and as a foreign national, I've encountered quite a bit of constraints and challenges throughout the employment. So this time in LCL, I have three panelists joining me to share their personal stories about navigating through these challenges. So our purpose is to help international students get prepared and raise the awareness of these challenges. So firstly, I'm going to give an introduction of all the three panelists who joined me today. So firstly, we have Wei Lai. So Wei has been working as a language engineer at Amazon. She has experienced visa shifts when transitioning from a postdoc position to the industry. And then we have Yiyun Zhao, who's currently a machine learning researcher. She can share her experience about how to advocate the visibility of the challenges that international students encounter at the department level. We also have Arunima Choudhury, who's a data scientist. Arunima has experience of handling work permits in various positions, including in both academia and the industry. And before we start the panel, I wanted to add a disclaimer that the content of this panel should not be taken as legal advice. The purpose what we are doing it here is to share to people what kind of challenges that you should foresee when you are looking for a job in America as a foreign worker. So we really hope you to get a sense of like what kind of problems and factors you should consider, and then you should always consult the International Student Office or your lawyer for any decision making. Okay, so let's get started. The first question we have is, what work permits should I consider if I wanted to start working in the industry? So for international students, when we completed a master or PhD or bachelor's program in the States, we usually get OPT, which could be 1 year for non-STEM degrees or 3 years for STEM degrees. But after OPT, we would have to shift to other types of work permits. So there has been H-1B lottery. And Yiyun, would you like to talk a bit more about H-1B?
Sure. So for the H-1B, actually there at least there are two types that I know. So one is called non-cap H-1B. That was basically more designed for the people who are looking for industry in their like non-profit kind of companies. Usually they are including hospitals, academic scenarios as well, and this kind of jobs, this kind of job visa was basically as its name suggests, like a non-cap, which basically means that you don't need a lottery. Basically, if your supporter or employer like want to support you, that basically they can just help you to get it. But there's one slight sort of pitfall or something that we need to think about it, is that because it's non-cap, basically means that if you want to then later on switch a job into an industry, it will be causing a little bit issue because your H-1B might not be able to work in the profitable kind of company scenario. So in that kind of scenario, you probably need to get a new H-1B if that was the case. So basically, and to summarize, the advantage of getting that is that you don't really need to get into a lottery. But the disadvantage of it is basically in the future, it might causing a problem when you're switching to a new scenario. And then alternatively, I guess most of our people was also working on a capped H-1B, which basically means the lottery. The lottery right now was actually kind of tensive. Like basically, it's usually happened in early March that we're if you are getting an offer or if you are admitted into the if you are like also not even like this is not necessarily required to actually be in the company. Sometimes if you just get an offer, you probably are allowed for you can like reach out the company to ask whether you can get into an H1B lottery, and usually it has happened. The registration is usually happened in the early March, and then you basically need to talk to the companies, and they usually collect a bunch of materials from you, and then you will be go into the lottery procedures, and the result would usually get out at the before the April 1st. And that was basically the whole procedure. But I think the one thing that people might miss is that although the process is kind of automatic, but usually like we don't like a lot of people don't know that sometimes even before you are joining the company, you might had an opportunity to ask the company to help you to get out the H1B lottery. And in terms of the H1B lottery, I know there's like a different pools, master versus bachelor, and the master pools have a higher chance to get selected than the bachelor pools, or like a more advanced degree, like which including master and PhD. But other than that, there's not really something that we can control because it's sort of lottery itself. I probably take a lot of time, but other people can jump in if there are more things to say. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's about H1B. And then beyond these two common work permits, people also mentioned the existence of CPT, because Yiyun, you has used the CPT for an internship. Could you give us a little bit introduction about how CPT works, and does it contrast with OPT?
Yeah. So I think the other thing that probably as a linguist we do not utilize a lot is CPT. So CPT also, the one that I was using was more about an internship, which is actually happened simultaneously when I was doing a PhD. So in general, like CPT actually have some, I think it vary a little bit across the university. So I would strongly suggest people to talk about the international service with your apartment, because sometimes some schools have more restrictions than the others, but usually there's some requirement for me. So I was also doing another master in my apartment. In my department. So basically, I was reading the profile. I actually satisfy some of the criterion, so that basically qualified me to actually get an CPT. And the procedure is usually if you get an internship, and then they will give you an offer, and then basically you need to write some document to apply for your CPT, and then usually like the requirement to get an CPT is that it somehow contribute to your academic objective. So for me, some of my internship actually very strongly correlated to my dissertation, so I can kind of justify that, and to basically go through this procedure. And then one thing that we need to kind of be careful is that when you're applying CPT, there are also two types. One is part-time CPT and the other is full-time CPT. So part-time CPT is less than 20 hours and full-time is higher than 20 hours. I think, so as far as I know, that part-time CPT, they do not interact with your OPT terms. Basically, if you work a little bit less and then less than hours, it does not really matter how long you worked with. But the full-time CPT, which means that 20 hours plus, that you need to be a little bit careful, because if you had a full-time CPT longer than 1 year, I think you kind of disqualified to apply for the OPT. So basically, I think the advantage to get an CPT was actually you get a more you can have an opportunities and also the visa status to work as and for an internship, which is kind of important for our later on employment. But then we also need to be careful, like how long we are gonna apply it. And of course, like if you're working outside the university domain, I think CPT is kind of inevitable for working status. Yeah.
Yeah, and it should also be noted that by communicating with the international student office, different university would have different processing time. So if you consider doing an internship or if you consider find a job after your graduation, it's really recommended that you consider this work permit application as soon as possible because, for example, right now for OPT, it could take several months for OPT EAD card to eventually arrive. So it never hurt to start researching about these policies and figure out the options, even though you haven't got a job offer yet. Okay, and then Yiyun, you also mentioned the extended OPT in our conversation before. So, in what kind of scenarios we can use the extended OPT? Yeah.
So basically, right now, I guess as long as we have a degree in the US, we usually would get at least a non-STEM OPT, which is 1 year. So STEM OPT is basically like usually it go with your really program code. It is not sometimes even verified by your like program name. So I would really strongly suggest people to verify their program code. And if it is for into the STEM code kind of categories, you will get an 2 year extended years to further work on it. So sorry, I probably missed the question again. Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, so in what scenario we can use the extended OPT? I think you already answered the question, but like what kind of programs did you enroll so that it's considered as a STEM program? Could you give us an example? Because it's not usual for linguists to get a STEM degree.
Yeah, so first of all, yes, as I said, STEM or non-STEM, like a little bit unfair stuff is that like later on I realized that STEM and non-STEM that was not really really like defined by the skills. It's more like an administrative kind of procedure. It really depends on the code that your program actually were lying. The reason I was emphasize this is like because previously, when I was in grad school and I actually registered in a master that I thought is in STEM because we shared a lot of courses there. But the problem is that later on, like everybody actually believe in the department believed that was a STEM, but later on we've actually find out that was not a STEM degree, which and then the only way that we find out is actually to read your program code and then trying to find out what are the list of the STEM code. So this is the first step to figure out whether your program is STEM or not STEM. And I know, and secondly, I think also connected to the previous Lucy was introducing, I was actually advocate a bit for trying to get a STEM code and ask our like linguistics department. I know like a lot of like currently probably majority of our department are not really a STEM, although like we are kind of getting a STEM kind of skills. So so I know like a couple of them, such as at least I know like UCSD linguistics, they're trying to get they're either getting a STEM code already or they are very close to that. So I do think there's also an internal like movement for the linguistics department to actually get a STEM code. If not, we can also advocate it. But more like practically, that might not actually happen in a very short period of time. I think one more realistic approach that we can do is actually find out a master, which is STEM, that also closely related to linguistics, and then trying to see either negotiate with your advisor or department to see whether somehow you can also do a master in route of your PhD. And for me, I'm kind of lucky case because in our department, we do have like internal track for this. And also the advisors are general, my thesis advisor are kind of flexible. So they do allow you to kind of swapping the courses or sometimes transfer the courses to somehow double count your degree. And so basically for me, I did a master in information, and we had a lot of shared courses, and that's how I got an STEM degree as well. So now you probably will be worried about now you get a PhD degree, which is non-STEM, and then your master degree, which is STEM, like how this OPT thing works. So as far as I know that after did some research, basically my experience was that you can still have this 2-year STEM from your STEM master after your 1-year PhD. Condition on that, you do not have already a STEM PhD, or you do not already use another STEM master degree. So basically, if you do have a STEM PhD already, or you have a STEM master, you have already used STEM master. So that basically you've already had a 2-year STEM period that would not actually add a 2-year that basically do not add a 2 years if if you already have them in this advanced STEM degree. So that's the information that I know. Yeah.
Yeah, these are just some options to consider, but the specific policy may really vary from university to university. So we should always check with our advisor and our international student office to figure out the specifics. Yeah. And then we also mentioned that it's not easy for people to get the H-1B lottery. So sometimes we would have to consider alternative work permits after we use all our OPT. So Arunima and Wei have experience of using the O1 visa. So Arunima, would you like to start talking about like what's required by the O1 visa application?
Sure. So O1 visa, the one that I'll be specifically talking about is called the O1A, because O1A, the O1 visa is, I think it's of at least 2 types, O1A, there's O1B, and so on. Now, O1A applies to all the academics, researchers, even if you're working outside of academia, and if you're in any kind of a research position, analyst position, the O1A visa will still apply to you. Now, interestingly, the O1 visa, it's for individuals with extraordinary abilities and achievements. So you have to prove to USCIS that you are extraordinary in your field. And USCIS has around 9 requirements, if I remember correctly, and you need to fulfill at least 3 of those criteria, the requirements that USCIS have. So the criteria, things like, have you made some major contribution, significant contribution in your field? Have you published, and are your publications being cited by a lot of people? It can be, are you demanding a very high salary in your current job? And also letters of recommendations can also help here. So you need to meet at least 3 of these criteria, but the more you meet, the stronger your profile would be. So the lawyers, when you're working with lawyers, and this is something I definitely recommend if you're filing for an O1A visa, definitely work with lawyers so that the lawyers can petition for you and build a very nice petition supporting your achievements and accomplishments over the field. Now, what I needed to do is, when I was filing for my O1A, I filed for O1A twice before, and there's one currently. I'm working with my lawyers for another O1A right now. So you need to gather all the evidence that you have. So every publication, everyone who has cited you, every presentation that you have given, if you have been on a panel, if you have reviewed for journals or a conference abstracts and all that. So gather all the documents that you have. And something I would recommend, that do not take for granted any of your achievements. Like sometimes you might think that this is not a big deal, but still let your lawyers know that you have done that, and let the lawyers decide if they can use those achievements for your petition, right? Now, also, it is very useful to get letters of recommendations from people who are accomplished in the field. So You can get letters from your advisors, faculty members in your department, or other faculty members who you probably have collaborated with, or who like people who know the significance of your work in your field. And one thing I would say when you're filing for O1A, one thing you absolutely need is a lot of patience, because the supporting evidence that is required to petition for O1A is very extensive. And the lawyers usually take, like, they can take around 6 to 8 weeks just to prepare the petition. So be patient, communicate with the lawyers constantly, and work with them. Now, there are a few challenges with O1A that everyone should keep in mind. So the biggest challenge is that if you are switching jobs, if you have an O1A and then if you're switching jobs, the O1A cannot transfer to your next job. You will need to file another O1A with the new company from scratch. That's one of the biggest challenge. It's unlike H1B, especially the capped H1B, which can be transferred. O1A cannot be transferred from one job to another. So O1A is also valid for 3 years. And after 3 years, you have to renew it 1 year at a time. So that can be another challenging aspect for O1A. Now, the other thing was that if you have a dependent spouse, the dependents of O1A cannot work in the country, which is O3 visa. They cannot work in the US. And so one of the interesting things that I have experienced with O1A is that many recruiters, they have never heard of O1A. So I tell them that I need the O1A visa, and they're like, okay, I have not heard. And sometimes they will just Google while on the call, and then they see, okay, it's for people with extraordinary abilities, and they find it a bit intimidating. And a lot of the smaller companies and startups, in my experience, they might not have the budget or the expertise to file an O1A. So these are some things that you need to keep in mind. But if you have a PhD, if you have good publications, presentations, I think O1A is definitely a good option to look into. Yeah.
Oh, wait, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. In my experience, the preparation for the application for O1A is actually longer. It's 3 months. It's more than just like 8 weeks. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind, that how to coordinate the timeline of application for O1A with the timeline of your onboarded to the job. And then, yeah, I have similar experience that my O1A is rated based on citation, publication, and peer review. And I think one thing to have in mind is to do a good job and keep track of what kind of papers or conference abstract that you have reviewed. Put them in the same folder so that if you want to make use of it, like they're all there. And I think there are a little bit about the recommendation letters. What I got from my lawyer is actually they need a mixture of recommendation letters from people in the industry as well as people in the academia. And they want people that know me well, like my advisor, versus people actually barely know me, but just know me from my paper or from my conference presentation. So that's a little bit trickier than getting a reference letter from the academic, just for academic jobs. So I would say keep networking and keep to know people from the industry and know people from conferences that you don't interact a lot with, so that you can have a representative sample of referees that you can turn to when you need this kind of recommendation letters. And then there are other criteria other than citation, publication, and peer review. I think they also will recognize some of the award and professional membership and patent, but those are like more difficult. It's kind of beyond our league. I personally have this award of Best Student Award and I think that's pretty good. But my lawyers is like that is not good enough for an O1 visa. So yeah, I think the majority criteria we are thinking about it is more citation, publication, and peer review.
Thank you
That's all.
Thank you for talking us through the O1A visa. Then we are going to switch gear. So talk about like what to consider after we already get a valid work permits, because things still happen. When we work with a working visa, then there are just constraints for us to think of and get prepared. For example, after we got the lottery of H1B, after we successfully petitioned our H1B, there are still constraints applying. For example, for H1B, we have to be constantly stay employed. For example, if the company did a layoff, we only have 60-day grace period to find the next job, and the next company has to file the H1B transfer within the 60 days. So during the 60 days, then there are a lot of things for us to do. We have to pass all the interview, and the new company has to finish the preparation of the paperwork before filing it to USCIS. Otherwise, we would have to change our status from H1B to other status to stay in the US. And also, being on H1B means that we would always need a sponsorship from a company that hire us. If a company is looking for a contractor position, that usually means that we probably couldn't take that position because for a lot of contractor position, there aren't H1B sponsorship. And there are also other factors to consider. For example, what happens if we are running out of time on our current visa status? Can we buy more time? Arunima, would you like to share your experience with that?
Yeah. So I had run into a situation where I was running out of my visa status and I needed more time to look for a new position. And I think this is a common experience for a lot of the people in the last couple of years who were impacted by the layoffs, this mass layoffs across the tech sector. So the last resort scenario for this one, and that helped me buy more time, was getting a B2 visa, which is the tourist visa. Now, if you are getting the B2 visa, you don't have to leave the US first. Don't think that you have to leave and then apply. That's not the case. You can stay in the US and apply for a change of status from your current visa, whatever you have, to a B2 visa. Now, the good thing is as soon as you apply for the B2 visa, like as soon as USCIS receives your petition for the B2 change of status, you are now eligible to stay in the country for 6 months. You don't need to wait for USCIS to approve your petition. As soon as they receive it, the clock starts, and you can stay in the country for 6 months. So that gives you some time to stay in the country, whether to get things sorted, if you plan to leave, then you can like get things sorted. But if you want to stay in the country and maybe I don't know, find another job, then it gives you the time. Now, one thing is that if you are on the B2, you cannot work on that visa. You cannot make any income. You'll be violating USCIS law. But if you get a job offer during those 6 months, then you can transition back into your employer-sponsored visas, which could be an H1B or an O1A, whichever visa you're using. And but something to keep in mind with B2, again, you should definitely check with lawyers, is that depending on your case, there might be some scenarios that would require you to leave the country once you get a new offer, get a new visa actually, and then re-enter the country on the new visa. So in some cases, I personally did not have to do that, but my lawyer said that there might be some, like, it depends on the discretion of the USCIS, basically. So, but yeah, B2 getting on a B2 gives you 6 months. And if you are in a difficult situation, definitely utilize this option.
That's true. Some of you may have been working as a postdoc for a while and then decided, I wanted to switch to industry. And by working as a postdoc, usually people had to use the J1 visa. And there are some constraint of a J1 visa as well. For example, there's the 2-year home residency requirement. Wei, would you like to introduce to us like what is that constraint and how do you bypass that when you decided to switch to the industry?
Yeah, sure. So this 2-year home residency requirement is sort of a requirement associated with a J1 visa. It basically means that you need to work at your home country for 2 years before you can start to get another visa at the United States and then keep working. So if you don't fulfill that requirement, they will not allow you to switch to another visa. So I would say I don't know. I think this works. It varies by different countries, but for China, where I come from, in order to get a waiver to waive that requirement is pretty complex. So I would say, before you get it to a postdoc position, just think about it and try to get more positions or more offers so that you can have more leverage there. And don't just easily settle on a postdoc position with a J1 visa, because then you will have this pain in the neck that you will need to get the waiver to waive the 2-year home residency requirement. And then, to get the J1 waiver, what I did is to, I did a couple of paperwork that I need to fill out and then mail the hard copy to the right authorities. And then the challenges that I get is that it really interferes with my timeline of get onboarded to my next job. So I think to get a waiver, you actually need to know what kind of job you're going to do for the next. So you need an offer. You need an offer letter. So that means you get the offer, and then you apply for the waiver to waive the 2-year residency requirement. And then you get a working visa to get onboarded to the next job. And then after you fix all those steps, your company might have been waiting for like 6 months or so, and they might decide to go with another candidate. So that's the kind of challenge I get. That's why I would strongly suggest you to, like, if the P1 really like you, or if you have any leverage, talk to them to see whether they can get an H1B visa instead for you, because H1B is also pretty common among postdocs. And then if you have multiple positions, you also need to consider like whether the H1B is a reason for you to choose one position over another, because you don't want to stuck into the needing to wait for the 2-year home residency requirement for a J1 visa. So yeah, that's the long and short of it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So unfortunately, I think the big takeaway from all of our personal stories is that we have to foresee the future. So one solution may work totally fine for the current situation, but because the market is changing and also the company's willingness to like invest more to hire an international employee could also change throughout time. So we would have to consider all the factors, not just what's happening right now, but what's going to happen in a few months, what's going to happen in a few years. The purpose for us to do this panel is to raise the awareness, to get prepared. So we may share a lot of details, but don't feel overwhelmed. We just wanted to let you know that here are some options, and we got some stories of people who achieved that. So if there are some challenging situations, you know that you may consider these options as a choice. Yeah. And now we are going to head toward like the really far away future. We are going to talk about green card. So should we really start considering green card so early when we are still in grad school? So the answer is yes. I never thought about any immigration stuff when I was in my PhD program. I only think about like completing my PhD, and then it's only when I started my job search that I realized how complex the whole system is. And then after I started the job, in the first 2 years, I experienced 4 layoffs in my company. Like I see so many people being impacted, and then it has been so stressful because I don't know which day that would come to me eventually. But I've seen like having a green card would add a lot of sense of security during the process, because you know that despite losing the job in this unstable market, you don't lose the right to live in the country and look for the next job. You don't have to worry about packing everything up and then go. So yeah, we are going to invite Arunima and Yiyun to talk a little bit more about the green card application. So Arunima, would you like to give us some introduction?
Yeah, sure. So I agree that yes, you should definitely start looking into green cards probably as soon as you start your PhD or master's program. I made this mistake. I was like Lucy, never worried about the green card. Um, so I'll give you a very quick overview of the different types of green cards, and then I'll talk about 2 specific self-sponsored green cards that you should start looking into. So to look into there are 2 broad ways to look into the green cards. One is based on priority, where we have the EB1 category of green cards, which are the highest priority green cards. And within EB1, we have options like EB1A, EB1B, EB1C. And then we have the EB2 category of green cards, where we have the EB2 green cards, and something that everyone should definitely look into, which is the EB2 National Interest Waiver green card. Now, the other way to classify green cards is based on whether the green card is self-sponsored or employer-sponsored. So within EB1A category, within the EB1 category, the EB1A green card, it's a self-sponsored green card that you will petition for yourself. But it's not easy to get EB1A. It's one of the hardest green cards to get. It's known as the Einstein green card or something like that. In the EB2 category, the EB2 National Interest Waiver is a self-sponsored green card, but the regular EB2, it's an employer-sponsored green card. So when you hear of people like who have been on H-1B for a while and they are waiting for green card, most likely they are talking about the regular EB2 green card. Now, the employer-sponsored ones, of course, we don't have much control over that because you don't know what will happen in the future, what green card options your employer will sponsor you. So what you should do while in grad school is to do research on EB1A and EB2 National Interest Waiver, especially the National Interest Waiver, because it will be relatively easier to get than the EB1A green card. Now, the challenge with EB2 category in general, both EB2 and EB2 National Interest Waiver, is that if you are an Indian citizen or a Chinese citizen, the wait is brutal. I don't know exactly how many years the backlog is right now, but I've heard it's like 15 to 20 years of wait just to get the green card, right? So if you file if you file your green card early on while in grad school, you can still save a lot of years of that waiting period. And also, there's something called a labor certification. Once you get the labor certification for your application, you'll still have to wait many years to get your green card. But once you get the labor certification, you can stay in the country. You can be in the country, although you cannot work in the country. You'll have to still get on a visa. So again, speak with lawyers. This is something you should do while in grad school. There are many law firms online, like quite reputed law firms, which which provide free profile evaluation. So opt for those. Send your detailed CV to those law firms and see where you are lacking and how to improve your profile so that you can apply for one of those. And like if you have a few hundreds of dollars to spare, like maybe like $400-500 to spare, I know it's tough as a grad student to have that kind of money. But just in case if you have that, I would also recommend that you speak with some lawyers in person, just get a consultation about your profile and ask them what you need to do to make your profile strong enough so that you can apply for a EB2 national interest waiver or even an EB1A, right? All right.
Yiyun, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I can share some like personal stories, and also some like something that I thought probably will be useful. So first of all, I would strongly agree with that people should start thinking about the immigrant status and green card in a very early on. Because I was also kind of people like, oh, I don't even know what I'm gonna do after my grad school. Why do I even bother to think about this? And this turned out to be like especially critical later on if you want to have a more flexibilities and more opportunities. So I do feel like think about this, although it's not really happy sort of stuff to think about is very important. And one thing people, and I strongly agree that we should start to even like not really necessarily apply, but think about it and then looking for the information about the green card right now. The reason is that so one people like previously I do had a concern because of I'm in on the F1 like kind of status, and if I apply a green card, do I actually would be like somehow worried about my status or something like that. But in general, for the green card has two like steps. One is 140, which is basically you get an submissions, and then the USCI is trying to look at your qualifications, and then after you got approved, it's the next step called for 85. So for the first step, it's okay. Like so, basically, if we are on the F1 student visas, it's totally fine. We're applying for at least 140. And the other thing that I think, and the other thing that I think will be helpful is that there's a concept called priority date, which I think it's already, sorry, my cat, it's already like showed up in the screen. So priority date is kind of important. It's sort of like a kind of, we're basically on the line, and probably for the majority of the people, they might not have a line, but for Chinese and Indians, I think right now for the rest of the world, we still have a little bit line. And then the priority is like an kind of you're in the restaurant and we're getting a ticket, and then we're kind of calling like basically based on that particular order. So, and this particular priority date can be shared across different categories. So that means basically if you get an IW right now, like now you've already got a ticket to be in line. And later on, if you feel like, oh, this line is too long, or like if I accumulate enough contributions, I could somehow switch to like a higher, like a more advanced line. That priority date can help you. Like basically, you can still using that ticket to in the line. So basically, you kind of have a more early date, but like somehow go into the shorter line. So this is like my and me my husband's experience. I would basically somehow had a chance to switching the lines by upgrading from NIW to EB1 category. So that's something like basically, and also later on, even you're in a company for like an like EB1B kind of category, if somehow company sponsor it, you can still using the same priority date. So in general, the priority date can across different grades and a different type of sponsored or non-sponsored kind of like they allow you to inherit that priority date. And the other thing I want to kind of share is that so my husband was actually on a postdoc position, and he actually get a chance to later on ask their university to apply EB1B category, because EB1A is pretty hard. As we are as already mentioned previously, you really need a strong records, but EB1B is relatively easy. But I think in general, a lot of university, they probably don't know, or and then if you don't bring up, they probably also pretend they don't know. So one possibility is that also advocate whether to seek for, if you're on a postdoc position, and to seek for whether the university might willing to actually help you with the EB1B green card applications.
Yeah, thanks, Yiyun. And I see we are a little bit over time, but we already just finished all the questions that we prepared. And before we go to Q&A, I wanted to address the question occurred during the session, everything about work environments that you were afraid to ask last Tuesday. Because someone asked, are international employees treated differently, perhaps more strictly, as the international employee depends on their employment to stay in the US? So this is a question that we don't have a direct answer because everyone's feeling varied from company to company. But we wanted to point out that all companies will say that they treat the employees equally, but it's still valid that if you feel more constrained in some position, because it's true that international employees had to navigate much more burden before they actually come to show up to do the work. So it's okay if you feel that being an international employee could be challenging at some time. And that's also our goal of this panel. We wanted to increase the visibility of these challenges to help you get mentally prepared. Although the system is so complicated, but we hope that you know that there are people who get through all these challenges, and you can always ask for help. Yeah, we don't have the time for Q&A after this one, but I would be in the Gather. So if you have any questions, feel free to come to talk to me in Gather. You are also welcome to just message me in Slack if you have any questions. Yeah, and thank you for our panelists for generously sharing their personal stories. It really means a lot for us to raise the awareness in our community.
Thank you for having me, Lucy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.